Good evening and welcome to another edition of Down to the Wire. This is our special pre-entry nominations for the Breeders' Cup edition. Next week we will be coming back with some down and dirty picks in most of the Breeders' Cup races. Joining me again this week is Capping with Candace. Candace here. Candace, a record number of pre-entries, and a few of these races got quite a few horses to cross-enter today.
Yeah, definitely the races are loaded. I didn't see a ton of surprises, maybe a few omissions in the turf sprint that were a little puzzling. The inclusion of Chiquita in the Filly Mare Turf, which we'll talk about later today, was maybe the only real surprise I saw, but definitely a lot of horses entered, and a lot of horses entered in multiple races.
Well, we're going to talk about 6 of the races and try to focus in a little bit. First off, we're going to talk about the juvenile, and then we'll talk about the Distaff. The turf, which got a good mix of American horses and Euros. The mile, which got almost 25 horses, with Wise Dan being out. And then we'll also talk about the classic and the Filly Mare Turf, which got a good number of horses from both America and Europe. Starting off with the juvenile, I think pretty much all of the top 2-year-old names were in here. And one of the things I think it's going to be interesting is how do you compare American Pharoah from the west, Daredevil from the east, and Carpe Diem, all impressive winners in their last races.
Yeah, I think that's going to be the real question here, and it doesn't become any easier when you look at, say, Daredevil's, his races have come on wet tracks, so we don't really know what he's going to do on a dry course at this point in time. And then you also look at the way, several of these horses have been winning. I mean, Daredevil and American Pharoah have been winning their races up on the lead. And to be fair, a lot of the horses in this race have been doing that. I mean, perhaps it's not a surprise in juvenile races to see so many of the entrants being horses who've been winning up on the speed, because most of them have been sprinting to this point as well. But I think this race is really interesting just because of the fact that we're going to have a lot more speed in here perhaps than any of these horses have faced in a race to this point. I don't think it's going to be all that dissimilar to the race last year, where we saw a lot of speed early on, and I'm not sure we'll get quite that same type of a pace meltdown, but definitely going to be tough on the front runners. I think this is an interesting race because if you're against the likely favorites, I think maybe for me when I look at it, American Pharoah seems the toughest of the horses you would expect to be among the leaders on the top board on the day, just because he's done he's won impressively locally. But if you think he's going to be hindered by the speed at all, which I do, then this becomes a really interesting race. The likes of, say, Calculator, who's ran on the West Coast, and Texas Red, who ran the front runner as well, become horses that you can use if you think that they can come from off the speed, if they're going to get that setup that they haven't gotten their races to date. And even horses like Mr. Z, who we've seen dance on the dances and maybe be a little bit inconsistent, you wonder what kind of form he's going to bring here.
Yes, he'll be shipping out west, and he's had some good races that put him in the mix, and he's had other races that look like they may fall short. I do think there's 3 speeds here. The most probably unknown of the speeds, I think, I know about him, and I've watched all 3 of his races multiple times, but I think to a lot of fans, they have no clue about Super Colossal. And that last race at Monmouth, he went off, set some fast fractions. He's got Paco Lopez. He's 3 for 3, and they flat out, after that last race, have pointed for this race for 60 days. American Pharoah 2 wire-to-wire wins, but that's on the West Coast and on dry track. And then you've got Daredevil with 2 slop wins. And I just thought that he was sent both races in the slop, and he's just one of those horses that just skipped over it, loved it, drew away, ran fast times, and some horses will just do that. So I think those are some speed horses. Then you got a horse like Carpe Diem who looked like a winner every step of the way the last time, but the difference is that he was close to the pace at 5.5 furlongs, but he did rate from 4th in that win at Keeneland.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Carpe Diem is one who's very intriguing to me for exactly the reason you said, that yes, he went to the front in his first few races, but then last time I was able to rate, and I do think that tactical speed is going to be important here in this type of race, especially if it gets a little hot up front early. Another horse who I think is pretty interesting that you don't really hear people talking about is Private Prospect. This is a guy who's been running out in the Midwest. He won his first 3 starts, and he finished second over at Arlington in a Grade 3 behind Recount, just lost by a head. He's kind of more of a presser type, so he'll be forwardly placed, but one who can maybe hang around, doesn't necessarily need the lead. That second place finish, of course, came in Arlington, and that was over the all-weather track, so you wonder how much to kind of take into account on that, because he has won on the dirt a few times at Prairie Meadows, so he's another one too who I think is under the radar. But for me, I really think that American Pharoah is going to be extremely tough to beat, but if it does get hot up front, I'm looking really towards Texas Red, who I thought ran an even race in the front runner. He needs more pace. He did not get the pace that he needed there, and he galloped out very strongly, so the distance is not a concern at all. And the other one I'm looking at is Calculator. He really caught my attention down at Del Mar. He had a few races there where he was, off the pace and wide, which just was a death sentence over at Del Mar this season. And I thought that in the front runner, he closed the gap a little bit on American Pharoah compared to their previous races. So if he can improve just a little more, I think Calculator's another one who could really be in the mix here.
Should be an interesting juvenile. I will point out, if the 14 horses do go, post positions 12, 13, and 14 will be at a big disadvantage. So next week when we give out our picks, we'll be able to incorporate that in. Now the Distaff, this was one of those divisions all year long. At the beginning of the year, it was Princess of Silmar, Closed Hatches, and Beholder. Now 2 of those 3 are gone, and Closed Hatches, a lot of times after a race, and it's not red boarding, but after the race, some things you kind of look at and you go like, oh, well, the pace got too hot, or he had a bad post, or he didn't like the poly. But I've been searching for a week and a half, and I can't understand anything about that last race of Closed Hatches. So do you toss it out, or do you think this is a sign she's going off form?
For me, I think that she's one who, you're going to want a little bit of a price, and you're not going to get it here, I don't think, which is the problem. Coming off that poor race, you're not going to want to take anything too short, and that's what's not going to happen here. I mean, I do think that race was just so uncharacteristic for her that I can understand why people would just toss it. I'm not sure it's necessarily a sign that she's coming off of form, but she needs to improve mildly off of that race, and I'm just not necessarily sure that's going to happen. For me, Untappable looms large here. It's weird because I all year I didn't really think that she was quite fast enough to compete with the older mares, but with the attrition we've gotten in this race, and specifically with Beholder not running, I do think she's in a much more competitive spot here. But in the same time, I think you have to look at a couple of the local mares in this race as well. I mean, Iotapa is one who's incredibly consistent over on the West Coast, and if Santa Anita's a little bit speed friendly, of course this race is on the Friday, so last year on Friday it was very speed friendly. It could certainly play into Iotapa's favor. And another one who I think is interesting is Tis Midnight. So for me, this race isn't necessarily wide open, but I would say that there are definitely more than 1 or 2 horses that you need to be looking at here.
I do want to say that I think a lot of people are throwing out Don't Tell Sophia's efforts that last race, but I mean, she's 50% wins lifetime, and she's 4 for 5 this year. She beat Closed Hatches in the last race, and when she lost to Closed Hatches at Oaklawn, she only lost by a length and a half. So I just think that she's legit. Now, does that mean she's going to win? No, but I think it's not as fluky as that last race maybe appears. What was more fluky was Ria Antonio and some of the other ones. But Don't Tell Sophia winning wasn't that fluky. I think some people are just kind of getting a little ahead of themselves. A horse that I'm against no matter what happens is Belle Gallanty. I think she's had enough soft trips that this is the type of race that she doesn't have a prayer in.
Yeah, I mean, that's one I can definitely understand, and not one who I would necessarily be looking at here. Like I said, for me, I'm really honing in a bit on Untappable here. Not necessarily sure if she's ready, and maybe the track is a little bit of a query for her. A lot of people quite liked her last year on the juvenile fillies, and she kind of struggled there a little bit. But she would be the one I'm looking at. This is a smaller field, but again, post positions will matter a little bit. I wouldn't want her necessarily to be drawn out the widest of them all.
I think that one, I think closed hatches will definitely be favored, and then Untapper will be the second favored, and then you could get a difference. Like, I think a couple of horses are going to go off at 15-1 that might have a shot to get in the top 2 or 3. So that'll be interesting to see how the betting goes on that race. I do want to point out that Paranda, just because English Channel's been such a strong distance sire. It's a 1 1/8 race. She goes from the turf, Hollendorfer. You really have nothing to lose. So she's kind of interesting. We'll talk more about her next week. Now the turf race, 1.5 miles, drew a good mix of Americans and Euros. And let's start right at the top. Last week we previewed the Woodbine Canadian International, and Brown Panther ended up scratching out of that. He ran off in the post parade. What do you think about them turning right around and entering the Breeders' Cup?
I think they had to. I don't think there was necessarily a choice. I mean, they skipped Champions Day and came all the way out here for a reason. So to come out here and not even get a run, I think that they really had to put him here. It's kind of the same queries. The one thing you'd have against him is the distance, so that it might be just a little bit short. He does get a pony, so maybe he won't freak out again. But, the fact that he did flip out isn't something that I would say that people should be worried about, even though it looked crazy and he totally got loose. That's something I've never, ever seen from him before. He has a horse who can be a little bit keyed up and gets hot, sweats a little bit before races, but he's just never done something like that. So the chances of that repeating again, I think, would be pretty slim.
Some familiar connections. Flintshire's Juddmonte Farm owns. Just ran second in the ARC, but the ARC is kind of hard to decipher this year because Trev didn't have a lot of form going into it, but she ran pretty good. Was it a good ARC, and where does Flintshire sit in the hierarchy of distance horses in Europe?
The ARC itself, I wouldn't say it was a fantastic field, but it wasn't a terrible field by any means. You're right in saying that Trev didn't have a lot of form going in there, but there was some signs that she could run well. In her prep, she had the fastest closing sectional of any horse in any race on that day. So, she was showing a little bit of sign of turning around, even though, a lot of us didn't think that she'd win the race. Flintshire is one. Well, he's a Danzelli, which is important to me just because they tend to come and run really well in America. They really like firm turf. 12 furlongs absolutely is his distance. So, he really does fit in a race like this. The problem I'd have with Flintshire is he's a little bit tough to win with. He finishes second a lot. I mean, to good horses, yes, but a lot of times you have to look at some of these horses when you're looking at form and see what their best ground is as well. I mean, like finishing second to Ruler of the World at Longchamp over good ground, like that's Flintshire's ground. That's not necessarily Ruler of the World's ground, so I don't really look at that race quite as well. So, same with finishing second at Epsom to Cirrus de Seglas. I mean, Cirrus is a great horse, but again, good ground would definitely flatter Flintshire more than Cirrus. So, you have to kind of take that into account. I just think he's so tough to win with, and the fact that he was pointed to the ARC. The ARC was his goal for the year, whereas some of the other Europeans we'll talk about in here, their goal was here, and that makes a big difference in my mind. Yes, Flintshire ran really well in the ARC, but because that was his main goal, I'd be pretty surprised if he didn't regress a touch off that effort. I mean, he probably still finished top 4 regressing off that effort, but I would prefer others who would plan to come here all along.
Magician's kind of been thrown into some different races. He had a subpar effort, I thought, in the Arlington Million. Where does he fit this year? And just from looking at the pre-entries, do you think this is a tougher turf field than last year that he won at 12-1?
I do think this is a tougher field than he won with last year. I agree that his Arlington Million was definitely a subpar effort. I was there, and he should have really won that race. In the position that he was in all the way throughout, I was pretty surprised that he lost from there. But again, maybe he's just come back down to a reality. This is a horse who just really wasn't anything remarkable overseas before he came over here and kind of blew us away and won the turf, last year. So maybe he's just kind of come back to earth and shown us that he is kind of what he is. He was never really a world beater, and that's just kind of what we've seen from him in the meantime.
A horse that I want to talk about is Secret Gesture, and I follow some of the bigger races in Europe. I don't normally bet on them, but I do think you do. I mean, European, you do have to kind of gather some of the form in, and I do find it interesting that he lost to that Shida Zayed road horse, who won at Woodbine 2 races ago, and then just got clobbered on Champions Day. So I mean, from that form, it looks like Secret Gesture is not as good as Flintshire and Chiquita and some of these other horses.
Well, Secret Gesture, for one, she could run here. She could run the Filly Mare Turf. I think she's entered in both. I would expect her to maybe go the Filly Mare Turf. Regardless, yes, she lost narrowly to Shakespeare Road over at York. Shakespeare Road, of course, came here, well, to Canada, and won there. But again, this is another instance where you have to look at what a horse's preference is. Shakespeare Road did get clobbered on Champions Day. That was over heavy ground, which is not ground that he likes by any stretch of the mind. And that was in the big race. But that was won by Noble Mission, who's Franklin's brother. So, that might be stretching it a little bit. Her form, it fits. I think if she runs in the Filly Mare Turf, her form fits there. But to say that it would be along the lines of Flintshire or Telescope or some of the others would probably be stretching it a little bit. And she's another one who just seems to be a little bit tough to win with. If you're looking for other horses that you recognize in her form, she did win over Wall of Sound, who had kind of a tough race at Woodbine last weekend as well. So a couple horses that you'd recognize their names in her form lines.
A horse that I'm very excited to see, and I think just the presence of this horse in the race, trained by Sir Michael Stout, automatically means it's a better field than last year. Telescope, 10 lifetime races, 4 wins, 5 seconds, beat Hillstar by 7 lengths. Sir Michael Stout has won the turf twice. I think he's one of the top 3 trainers in the world. He points for races, and this horse, I read about 30 days ago that was pointing for this race, which means Sir Michael Stout will have this horse ready, and the field goes through this guy.
Agreed. I mean, if you're looking, at this race, Telescope is the first horse you absolutely have to look at. I mean, we talk so often about horses who come here and win and who aren't even necessarily group quality, but Telescope, he is a legitimate horse. He's won a few Group 2s overseas, finished second in Group 1, and his form this year is pretty solid. As you said, he won an Ascot, a Royal Ascot over good to firm ground, over 12 furlongs, beating Hillstar, who just won in Canada by 7 lengths. He's drawing away at the end in impressive fashion. The only other time he ran over 12 furlongs this year, he lost to Tagruta. But Tagruta, for one, got quite a bit away from him. She got 15 pounds from him in that race. And Tagruta's not a bad horse by any means. At that point that they ran, she was undefeated. And she also went on to finish 4th in the ARC as the favorite. So that's far from a poor form line to be following as well. Maybe his worst race of the year was when he finished 3rd to Australia at York. That race was a little bit short for his liking, so not one that I would be too worried about. But again, it was a strong race. I mean, Australia, we know what he did. He won the Derby. The Great Gatsby has won a couple big races this year, and Telescope beat Mukadram in there, who was a Group 1 winner in his own right. So, Telescope's been running with the big boys all year long, and this is his distance. If there's one query about Telescope, it's that his best races and finishes tend to come over kind of the bigger, wider tracks that you see over in the United Kingdom, and so it's maybe a little bit of a query how he's going to handle the tighter turns at Santa Anita. But on class and form, he definitely is a standout.
So, depending on where Secret Gesture and Chiquita end up at, if, let's say, one of them goes into this turf race, do the Americans have any chance, and what would be I mean, I guess would you say if you could have the Euros at 3-5 and the Americans at 2-1, where would you put your money on?
For me, I'd put it on the Euros just because I think so highly of Telescope in this race. And like you said you saw stuff from him 30 days ago. I saw stuff saying he's going to be appointed here in June and July. So, they've been saying that he's going to run here all along. If you're looking at the Americans, it's going to be some of the obvious ones. I think Hardest Core, who won the Arlington Million. I mean, even though that was a big surprise, he won. And, I think they've been doing some kind of, different training with him, kind of running him more on European-style gallops, not necessarily, doing 4 furlong, 5 furlong works like we're used to seeing here. But that might be what you need for a race like this. I mean, given that so many of our horses aren't trained for distance, maybe he's one who, actually has the endurance to win a race like this. He's not really American. Maybe converted American main sequence, you think, is one who definitely has a chance here. I've never really been his biggest fan, and I would be hard-pressed to take him at something short here, but he's 3 for 3 in America, so you'd be amiss to say that he can't win this race.
We do already know that he'll be getting a new jockey for the Breeders' Cup, and I think that's a significant factor in main sequence, just because he's won 3 straight times by a neck or a head, and I just think getting a new jockey, he's had 3 perfect rides, and we'll see if he can get that 4th one. The mile division, Wise Dan announced that he was out last week. They got 25 nominations. This one, I think, is a little more of a chance of the Americans to win, just because shorter distance, and they've got a couple of at least proven speed horses in there that, the fastest way to win a race is the shortest distance, and at least they're going to be getting a good trip, whether or not they're good enough or not.
Right, and that's when you look at the Americans and think one who jumps right off the page is obviously he would be your speed horse in here for sure, and he's one that if you kind of let him go, then he could take it definitely, and he's one who's kind of underrated because yes, he needs the lead, but I don't really see anybody in here who would really challenge him for the lead by any means. But his form can be a little bit murky because it's like either he wins or he just drops out of it if he doesn't get the lead or if he fades. But obviously he's always a dangerous horse because speed doesn't seem to kill him. It's pressure that does, but he's fast and he can run some fast fractions.
One of the horses, let's get your opinion. He's forever. He's kind of like the Jan Brady. He's forever known as Goldakova's brother. But how good is Anadin? I mean, is this a sideshow circus that they just want to bring him over because he's Goldakova's sister, or can he win this race?
He wouldn't be my top choice, but I definitely wouldn't say he can't win it. Anadin, kind of like some of the horses we just talked about in the turf, he's very tough to win with. He's only won twice in his career, but he often gets very close in high-quality races. He's a regular in Group 1 races, going 7 or 8 furlongs. So it's a little bit tricky. It kind of depends on what you think of the horses who have beaten him this year. One thing I would take into consideration is the fact that he lost to Tornado this year. Tornado was first up, Anadin was not, and so that kind of straight form makes it tough for me to take a horse like Anadin above Tornado, being that they both show up in this race. But one thing I can say when you look at his races this year, the one race that probably stands out with the worst result is his most recent race. That was at Long Jump on the undercard for the Arc. But before you discount him, I would definitely recommend watching the race. It is on YouTube. He had a nightmarish trip. It just was behind a wall of horses and had nowhere to go. So Anadin's kind of one I prefer others, but definitely not without a chance.
A horse that I started watching some races on a few weeks ago when I heard that he was coming is Mustajib, I believe it's pronounced. Dermot Weld, he does very well. And, if you look, I like the fact he's got 3 7-furlong races and a couple of mile races. I don't think what a lot of people realize in America is that in Europe, a 7-furlong race is close to a mile because they have a long stretch and they have the hills and the wide open. I mean, it plays a lot like a mile. I think he's live.
I agree. I mean, for me, Mustajib is definitely the horse that, unless he gets some crazy post position, he's the horse who I'm really looking at betting on the day. He had a fantastic race 2 back at Ascot in the Jersey Stakes. That's a very large field every year, and he was very impressive in winning that race. He's a guy who is just honest. He always wins his race every single time. And like you said, the fact that, really it seems like his best distance is 7 furlongs overseas, that's key to me because, like you said, not even just that they have the long stretches, but the turf courses there are just so deep. And you think, coming here to America, of all of our turf courses, Santa Anita's a runway as any of them. So that 7 furlong form should translate really well to going a mile here.
What about your boy Toronado? I mean, he obviously will be the favorite or second favorite at the worst. I mean, he's faced Kingman. He beat the great Verrazano. I mean, that's got to count for something.
Toronado, he will be the favorite here. He's the deserved favorite here. The Verrazano form line, I know a lot of people might scoff at that. But, again, you have to bear in mind, he was first up in that race off of a long, long break. A lot of times here I don't think we're used to seeing the long layoffs that you'll see with the European horses just because they have 2 seasons there, the flat season, the jump season, and, kind of breaks it up, and they, typically come off of a long layoff every year. So he was first up in there. Verrazano was very momentous in that spot. That was his last race, and that was the one they really wanted to win, and he wasn't able to do so. Anadin, of course, was in there as well, finished third. But his form, Toronado's form, is what has really stacked up since then. He's finished second twice since then, but it really is rock solid form. As you said, he finished second to Kingman, who you could make a case was the best horse, in training over in England. Certainly the best miler, and that was with Toronado giving Kingman 8 pounds, because Kingman, of course, was only a 3-year-old. He also finished second to Charmed Spirit, which is a horse people might not be quite as familiar with. But Charmed Spirit has done nothing but flatter that form since then in his own right, and he was a winner on Champions Day just last week. So, even though he's finished second behind 2 to 3-year-olds that he was giving weight to, it was obviously some pretty good ones because they both won off those efforts, in their next several races.
I think a horse that is well meant and the form-wise looks like she's got a big shot. The 5-year-old mare, Barcelona, 9 for 22, 700,000 in earnings. But I know a guy at the track. His name is Crazy John, and he always says respect the Ireland horses. But this horse comes in with a string of grade 1s, and again a lot of races at a flat 7 furlongs and a mile. I think this horse is well meant in this race. This would be a big coup for him.
I think so as well. I definitely think you're onto something. And again, horses like her are really interesting ones to bet. They're ones that I like because you look at her form, it's kind of muddled up. You'll see, wins, 5th place finishes, 7th place finishes, then a win again. But that's where you really have to look at the type of ground that they excel on. And she certainly excels on good to firm ground. And the horses she's beaten are no joke. She beat Rosina, who's a very, very nice filly. And some of the others that she ran against Dang, not totally well, but, for me, a lot of times when I look at European horses coming over, it's more the company they keep than the actual results sometimes. I've seen plenty of horses come over who have finished last 3 times in a row, but they're all in Group 1s against tough fields, and they'll come here and just romp. So, she's one who I certainly think is live. I definitely think wants this ground, and again, you have to look at that. I think, a key race for people really to look at is going to be that Prix de la Forêt. She was in there as well, as was Anadin, as was Carancate. I mean, there were several horses that we're going to see here that were in that race, and that would be one that I would recommend watching. It was a race full of a lot of questionable trips, that's for sure.
Should be a great race. Of course, next week we'll have the post positions and the jockey assignments, and I think that'll really help with determining our selections in that race. Now for the Filly Mare Turf, again, a lot of horses are in here and a lot of Euros. Barcelona's entered in that one as well. But a horse that surprised me coming right back, entered in a couple of races actually, Just the Judge. Now she was 6 to 5 at Woodbine, but I just don't think she's this class level of horse in either of the 2 races.
I don't either. Just the Judge, you can't fault what she's done over here. Obviously, she won this time, and she finished 3rd. Back at Arlington in what really has become the live race of the year, perhaps. That one seems like almost everybody's come back to win. out of that Beverly D. Darlington. But, if you look at Just the Judge's form prior to coming here, she hadn't won in a long time. Her last win, prior to winning over at Woodbine was in the 1,000 Guineas. That was in 2013. So, again, it's another one who's just really hard to win with, it seems, with it. And the horses she's lost to aren't bad horses. I mean, she lost to Zero Charlene, lost a few times to a very informed Thistlebird. She lost to Sky Lantern. I mean, these are all good horses, but it just can be hard for me to take these horses who seem like, they come close but don't get it done.
Dank won this race last year. I firmly believe if this horse was trained by any other horse in the world, I won't even be considering her. But since it is Sir Michael Stout, what do you take? She's had 2 races this year. 5th and 3rd got beat badly both times, but it is Sir Michael Stout.
I think she's, the plan has been for her to reappear here. She was beat badly in both of her races, but again, the form isn't so bad. She finished 3rd at Meydan in the Dubai Duty Free. The horses she lost to Just Away, who won that race, was the #1 ranked horse in the world. Vercingetorix, who finished 2nd there, coming up to that race was undefeated. So, she hardly lost to 2 bad horses. We've seen now Mushawish has been over here in the United States. He finished 4th. She beat him. So if you want to use that as a little bit of a, kind of a line through the form there with the horse at Ascot, she lost badly to the Fugue. That's a race that I would draw a line through. I think Filly was injured there, and as we've seen, we didn't see her since then. For me, I do think she's going to be ready here. But to me, Dank has never really been a world beater. I know she's done well here in the U.S., but she's never been one who has struck me as being an unbeatable horse. And I think even though we haven't seen her in quite some time, she's going to take a lot of money. So she's one who I'm going to have to kind of monitor the tote board. I wouldn't want to take her anything shorter than maybe 3-1, and I'm not sure that's possible.
Well, let's kind of handicap the 2 as an entry here. Chiquita and Secret Gesture, it sounds like you're thinking they're both going to run in this race. I thought maybe Secret Gesture might go to the turf, but if they both run here, what's the advantage of one versus the other at this distance, 1.25 miles?
I think, for Secret Gesture, I think the only reason I thought that she might go here is it just seems like most of her races are more in line with this distance, but she could go either way. Chiquita, she is a horse that, for one, if she does actually win, I'm kind of surprised because she ran on Champions Day, and the ground that day, of course, has been well documented, was heavy, but it was very, very testing ground at Ascot, which is an undulating course, like I just say, so it has the hills. So that was a tough race, and it'd be really hard for me to think that that race didn't take something out of her. Coming off that race off short rest would be a really big ask, I think. Chiquita's been plenty talented. She's one who, pretty much for the most part, always showed up -1 race, but she is extremely quirky as well. She had a race where, early in the year where basically she was clear of the field and should have won, and then she ran into a bush and threw her rider. Even in her last race at Ascot, she, really was in a perfect position to win that race and hung very badly. So she's a horse that when she's pressured, she has the tendency to really, really hang. So Chiquita's one that I'm kind of more worried about her possibly taking out half the field than I am of her winning the race.
She can pull a boxcar bill on the field. What about Tarfasha? Dermot Weld seems to have brought a stable here, and that horse has got some interesting form. I like the Grade 1 races, and she's won a lot of money with her 3 wins.
Yeah, I said on Twitter just a couple days ago that people should be incredibly interested whether or not Tarfasha comes over here, because she is one who could be a game changer if she does. Her win at the Curragh earlier this year was over Chiquita again, so if you're looking for that straight form of a couple runners in the field, that was a very, very nice win, easy win. She's again another one who clearly wants this ground, and her last race was an interesting one. She finished 4th in there, and that was in the Prix de l'Opéra, which was on the Arc undercard. The winner there was a horse named We Are, who's a Danzelli who, is very well thought of and respected. Tarfasha went out favored there. finished fourth in a very close finish. The first four were all a neck apart from each other. I think people might watch that race and on first glance think that she didn't stay the distance. But I'm more of the opinion that she just didn't do anything when she hit the front. She hit the front pretty early and then just kind of spun her wheels a bit. And so I really think Tarfasha is one who, other than getting her ground here, could certainly benefit from a more true pace scenario than one she received in a race like that.
So of the three, Fisalona, Dank, Tarfasha, maybe Secret Gesture, which one do you think will actually relish or like the firm course and the 1.25 mile distance of Santa Anita?
I think they'll all like it, but Tarfasha for me is the one who really could improve over these conditions. I think the pace in particular is one who could really, really help a horse like her. So she would be the one I'm looking at, and I think that she's a horse who isn't really known to a lot of people. The last race she finished fourth. I think she can kind of be a little bit of a sneaky one that you might be able to get a decent price with her, having Dank in the field, having Stephanie's Kitten in the field. So she's one who I definitely can see being an overlay in this race. But speaking of the Americans, you can't forget Stephanie's Kitten. I know we talk about the Euros winning these races, but Stephanie's Kitten has had a fantastic year. She's one who I certainly think has a big chance in here. As much as I like Tarfasha, I couldn't not use Stephanie's Kitten in this race either.
So of the two races, I think the Americans probably have a little bit better chance in the Filly Mare Turf. What's your thought? I mean, it's not much better chance, but a little bit better.
I agree with that, just because I do think Stephanie's Kitten is a top contender. Whereas, in the turf race, I don't see any American as a standout top contender. Whereas I do see that with Stephanie's Kitten here, and even a horse like Day at the Spa is one who she can fire a big one when she shows up on her day.
Oh, I think you're underestimating Mr. Finnegan in the turf division there. The Classic, 15 horses entered, only 14 can run. Right now, the Big Lover is the one on the outside looking in, but we'll see if we get a scratch here in the next week. I think this is this has got the biggest purse. It's the last race, and everybody's going to be talking about the Classic. One of the things I wanted to talk about was the pace of the race, because I think how you interpret the pace is going to be how anybody arrives at their selection. And what are some of your early thoughts on how the pace could go?
Well, with the field as it stands, with Big Casanovas and also eligible not running, you obviously have two clear front runners. You have Bayern and you have Moreno. I by no means think Bayern is going to be rated. I think he's going to be sent to the front. I think he should smash the Moreno. But if Moreno tries to come back on him, which is definitely possible given his nature, I don't expect that to fluster Bayern in any way. So, even though there's two speeds here, I would be really kind of shocked if we saw a speed duel in essence. I think one of those two is going to end up being the clear front runner here. And then you have a host of pressure. Share Belief will be close. California Chrome will be close. Candy Boy will be close. And then, maybe even like a Toast of New York and a Tonalist mid-pack a bit. And then you have kind of a bunch of, horses who will be far back. I guess Cigar Street will be forward as well. But it seems like kind of a pretty even, honest pace. I don't expect to see anything, any astronomically fast fractions or anything slow, just based off the form on paper.
I don't envision a fast pace, but I'm 100% convinced it's going to be a pace meltdown, and I think it's going to be a contested pace. And my reasoning is this. I think California Chrome is Victor Espinoza has been hearing all summer long. He screwed up at Belmont. Everybody thinks he screwed up at Pennsylvania, and I think he is going to be on a send mission, which means all of a sudden now you've got Bayern, Marino, California Chrome. I think Cigar Street is a huge horse. He's a complete unknown to a lot of people. I know this horse. This horse has got talent. He is going to be up on the front end. Again, another pace pressure horse. I see it as a complete pace meltdown right now. I think the Big Lover could get in there. I see 5, 6, 7 horses. Again, I don't think it's going to be 109. I just think they're going to be doing the ding-donging, and I think that tires out horses more than anything. When they start bobbing heads with another horse, they start fading fast.
Yeah, I definitely agree when you say that the pressure itself kind of does horses in faster than, even necessarily the times themselves. I don't necessarily agree with that pace assessment, but for me, I'm looking to kind of cover my bases with a variety of pace scenarios in case it happens anyway. Bayern to me is a standout here on form, winning that Haskell, winning, up at Belmont in the sprint, winning over at Pennsylvania. The fact that people are just tossing him over his home track, finally not having to shift, that's kind of shocking to me. And he, to me, is a must-use. There really isn't even a post position that I think hinders him. If he gets the rail, he goes to lead. If he draws outside, he goes to the lead. So, Bayern to me is a horse that you really have to use here, and I think he's going to be an overlay because so many people keep saying that they're going to just tossing him, which I don't understand. Tonalist is another one that you have to give a long, long, hard look to. Having won last time out in the Travers, he maybe in this race is one of the few true 10-furlong horses here. And as far as the others, even a horse like Toasted New York is a horse who people are really tossing aside. I know he was well beaten in the Pacific Classic, and people tend to kind of think, oh, well, he's a synthetic horse, but we've never seen him on the dirt. And actually, his pedigree looks just fine on the dirt for me. I know you wanted me to mention any time that I've seen it, but Toasted New York has been training at Southwell, which is what Declaration of War did prior to coming here as well. So I think if he shows after having trained there, that to me indicates he trained well over the surface, and so I wouldn't be worried about dirt for him at all.
I do want to get some talk in here on California Chrome. I think the sentiment, I really do think the people hate the owners now. So it's not about price anymore. I mean, California Chrome, he's going to be 6-1. There's nothing wrong with 6-1. But I think now you have to reevaluate what happened this spring. And I've been saying it all since the Belmont, and I wrote a blog about it. But there's no denying. He got 6 straight wins, and all 6 races at the third call he led by 3.5 lengths. I don't think that's a coincidence. What is your thoughts? Can he compete? What about the Pennsylvania Derby? Because odds aren't a factor. He's not going to. You can't just say, well, he's going to be 8-5, so I'm not going to bet him, because he's going to be 6-1, and that's a good enough price.
His price in here doesn't matter to me because I don't see him as a win threat, to be honest. I don't care about his loss at Belmont because I don't think he stayed, but his last race at Pennsylvania Derby, say what you want that he was on the rail, say what you want that he was boxed out, that race was bad. He was the first one off the bridle, he was the first one under the whip. He'll probably improve off that effort, second time up, but I don't think he's just anywhere near the quality and class of Bayern and Tonalist and maybe even V.E. Day and Candy Boy. He just seems to be really off form. So, I can't see him improving several lengths of that effort, which is what he would need to do here. We don't even though he's a West Coast horse, we don't even know what he would, if he would take to Santa Anita, which is bizarre that we've seen all these horses come out from across the country and train at Santa Anita, and he's over at Low Sal. That's something I don't really understand.
The other horse is Shared Belief. I mean, there's, put aside the whole hurting and the disqualification of the jockey and all of that stuff. Some people thought it was a little bit below average effort the last time. And then what about this? It's almost a Hitler-like zeal that Hollendorfer just refuses them to work out on any other track than Golden Gate, and he keeps them away purposely at Golden Gate. And does that mean anything? And what does that? And then what about your thoughts on that last race? Does the wide trip factor into any part of your handicapping?
I can already say that, I'll be at the Breeders' Cup on the day. So I can already say Shared Belief is not a horse who I'll toss, but he's not a horse that I will play until I see him in person. That last race definitely weighs on my mind. I think he was incredibly tired after that effort. I wouldn't say it was a subpar effort, but he had to really give it everything he had there, and he looked exhausted in the winner's circle. And it's hard to think that that race didn't take something out of him. As far as him working at Golden Gate, I know there was work of his that came out yesterday, and people were kind of really raving over it. I didn't really see why. It wasn't a bad work by any means, but he was working with like a 2-year-old who finished last on debut. Yeah, he made a nice inside move, but he was being asked a ton. So I wouldn't say it was bad work, but nothing to be ranting and raving over, and probably nothing I'd want to see from a horse who's going to be 8 to 5 on the day. But for me, really the key is going to be, is he really tired? Did that effort take something out of him, which, hopefully I'll be able to maybe see in person. He is a small horse, one who doesn't carry a lot of condition, and, the query still is he as good on the dirt as he is on the synthetic, and I'm not so sure.
Again, if they said, okay, you can, and Vegas will have this bet, and I'll be in Vegas, so if you want to bet it. But let's say if they just said 3-year-olds are even money, older horses are even money, and they pointed a gun at your head and said you got to put $50 on one or the other, would you go with 3-year-olds or the 4-year-olds?
I think this year I'd go with 3-year-olds, and that's not something that I would typically do. That's always a tough ask because I'm going against the older horses, but no, just when you look at it, I mean, Tonalist has beaten older horses. Byron seems to be in top form. Tufts of New York, I think, definitely rates a chance. VE Day, I'm not sure that I'll bet him, but I can see why people like him in this race. Share Belief, obviously, is the favorite. Candy Boy comes here on good form, so I think the 3-year-olds are going to be really tough this year, which is certainly unusual.
Well, I think that's where most of the betting is going to be on, especially in the exactas and trifectas, and it is, I think that race is kind of interesting. In the other 2 races, you got the 2 Euros versus the Americans, and in that race, you kind of got, I think most people are kind of, I think the odds would be like 7 to 5 on the 3-year-olds versus 8 to 5 on the 4-year-olds, but I do think that's a fair wager. I think it's, I will be in Vegas, and it will be interesting to see what they'll put up for an odds line, because they will have those type of bets there, and I do think it's one of those years where, you get 5 or 6 solid 3-year-olds, you got 5 or 6 solid older horses, and rather than picking an individual horse, 7 to 5 or 8 to 5 on a number is kind of interesting. I think sometimes it's ways to beat the races, and I kind of wish the tracks themselves, and I think in the future the tracks themselves are going to have to come up with those type of wagers, because win, play, show, and 10-cent supers, I think, is just not capturing the imagination of some of these people right now. So hopefully in the future we start to see some more of those bets. So I guess, it's kind of interesting. A lot of people were waiting for the pre-entries. You've got so many horses, you don't even know who's going to make the race. The sprint is just a ridiculous group of horses. Are you going to wait? I mean, what are you doing? I mean, do people over-evaluate? Do you just wait till the post positions are drawn and then start handicapping? What are you going to do?
For me, it's pretty light this week. I'll refresh my memory on a few replays just to refamiliarize myself with a few of the horses. But for me, if I'm doing any sort of handicapping this week, it's more just eliminating horses that I'm not going to consider if they make the race. So it's not really that much going on this week. It's really tough to look at these races without post positions, particularly being that so many of these races are going to be full field. And, post positions matter. I mean, here in the Classic, if we get, 13 horses, like you say, 10, 11, 12, 13, you're in big trouble. Unless you're a horse who goes straight to the lead or you're a horse that drops back. And even then, you can kind of force, post position can kind of force the hand of some horses, and that changes pace scenarios. People tend to forget in the trip sprint, post positions matter a lot on that downhill course for ways that you don't necessarily always expect either.
And about track bias is a little bit of a talking point this year. Last year, I thought they just kept on watering the track, and by halfway through the day on Saturday, it actually was a normal track. It just seems like with social media and things like that, I just don't think they're going to allow a track to be biased for 2 days. What's just your quick thought on that? Do you think they'd fix it if it was biased on Friday, or do you think it's still possible to end up with a speedway on Saturday?
I think it's possible, just because I don't expect Friday to be anything like it was last year. I mean, that was crazy, and I don't expect it to be like that. But Santa Anita normally, and again, we've seen it during this meet, it plays very fast, and it has played speed favoring, and not to the point that I'm hearing people on social media overwhelmingly complain, but when you look at the charts, it's favoring speed. So that's kind of what I would expect to happen. Maybe not something crazy like it was last year, but you're probably going to be an advantage if you're within a length or two of the lead early on, at least in the dirt races.
Well, and I also think you have to look at like to me, like the sprint is not a good race to judge a speed duel. I mean, they're
So,
going to run a 108 too. So if you get 7 horses that duel and run 43 flat, well, they're going to fade even on a speed bias. Yet if you give Secret Circle a 46-3, well, he's going to win by 5 and run a 107-4. Like, I just think, I think sometimes people try to jump, and like to me, no matter what happens in the sprint, like that's not a bias either way. Like to me, that race is all about speed and pace pressure. Even the 6.5 furlong race for the Filly. So I do think you have to be careful which races to judge a possible speed bias, because I do think sometimes you can jump the gun on that.
that, and I think, as much as people talk about the dirt being speed biased, you don't tend to hear people talk about the turf. Or the Santa Anita Turf course is one that, well, for one, that surface didn't change, and it's one that's been known to favor closers. So, even in some of these races that people are looking and they're, saying to me, well, the Euros, they're going to be outpaced by 10 lengths, blah, blah, blah. But that track has been known for years to favor closers. So something to bear in mind when you're looking at these races as well.
Well, next week we're going to come back. We're going to have our down and dirty picks. We know everybody's going to be handicapping, so we'll give you, one horse, maybe a few races. We'll give you a couple horses, but we'll go over about 7 or 8 of the races and key in. We'll have post positions, we'll have jockeys, and we'll know actually who's going to be in the races. So hopefully that gives you some fodder to listen to and work on as you start handicapping the races. That's going to do it for another edition of Down to the Wire.